Welcome to Soft Hour Library. Tonight's story begins now. Close your eyes and rest.
Chapter 9. The Goldfish Pond. We walked back to the house together. There was no sign of the inspector. Poirot paused on the terrace and stood with his back to the house, slowly turning his head from side to side. "Une belle propriété," he said at last appreciatively. "Who inherits it?" His words gave me almost a shock. It is an odd thing, but until that moment the question of inheritance had never come into my head. Poirot watched me keenly. "It is a new idea to you, that," he said at last. "You had not thought of it before, eh?" "No," I said truthfully. "I wish I had." But he looked at me again curiously. "I wonder just what you mean by that," he said thoughtfully. "Ah, no," as I was about to speak. "Inutile, you would not tell me your real thought." "But everyone has something to hide," I quoted, smiling. "Exactly. But you still believe that." "More than ever, my friend. But it is not easy to hide things from Hercule Poirot. He has a knack of finding out." But he descended the steps of the Dutch garden as he spoke. "Let us walk a little," he said over his shoulder. "The air is pleasant today." But I followed him. He led me down a path to the left enclosed in new hedges. A walk led down the middle, bordered each side with formal flower beds, and at the end was a round paved recess with a seat and a pond of goldfish. Instead of pursuing the path to the end, Poirot took another which wound up the side of a wooded slope. In one spot the trees had been cleared away, and a seat had been put. Sitting there one had a splendid view over the countryside, and one looked right down on the paved recess and the goldfish pond. "England is very beautiful," said Poirot, his eyes straying over the prospect. Then he smiled. "And so are English girls," he said in a lower tone. "Hush, my friend, and look at the pretty picture below us." But it was then that I saw Flora. She was moving along the path we had just left, and she was humming a little snatch of song. Her step was more dancing than walking, and in spite of her black dress, there was nothing but joy in her whole attitude. She gave a sudden pirouette on her toes, and her black draperies swung out. At the same time she flung her head back and laughed outright. As she did so, a man stepped out from the trees. It was Hector Blunt. The girl started. Her expression changed a little. "How you startled me, I didn't see you." But Blunt said nothing, but stood looking at her for a minute or two in silence. "What I like about you," said Flora with a touch of malice, "is your cheery conversation." But I fancy that at that Blunt reddened under his tan. His voice, when he spoke, sounded different. It had a curious sort of humility in it. "Never was much of a fellow for talking. Not even when I was young. But that was a very long time ago, I suppose," said Flora gravely. I caught the undercurrent of laughter in her voice, but I don't think Blunt did. "Yes," he said simply, "it was." "But how does it feel to be Methuselah?" asked Flora. This time the laughter was more apparent, but Blunt was following out an idea of his own. "Remember the Johnny who sold his soul to the devil? In return for being made young again, there's an opera about it." "But Faust, you mean?" "That's the beggar. Rum story. Some of us would do it if we could. But anyone would think you were creaking at the joints to hear you talk," cried Flora, half vexed, half amused. Blunt said nothing for a minute or two. Then he looked away from Flora into the middle distance, and observed to an adjacent tree trunk that it was about time he got back to Africa. "Are you going on another expedition, shooting things?" Expect so. Usually do, you know. Shoot things, I mean. But you shot that head in the hall, didn't you? Blunt nodded. Then he jerked out, going rather red as he did so. Care for some decent skins any time. If so, I could get 'em for you. But, oh, please do, cried Flora. Will you really? You won't forget. I shan't forget, said Hector Blunt. He added in a sudden burst of communicativeness. Time I went. I'm no good in this sort of life. Haven't got the manners for it. I'm a rough fellow, no use in society. Never remember the things one expected to say. Yes, time I went. But you're not going at once, cried Flora. Not while we're in all this trouble. Oh, please. If you go. She turned away a little. You want me to stay? Asked Blunt. He spoke deliberately but quite simply. We all. I meant you personally, said Blunt with directness. Flora turned slowly back again and met his eyes. I want you to stay, she said, if that makes any difference. But it makes all the difference, said Blunt. There was a moment's silence. They sat down on the stone seat by the goldfish pond. It seemed as though neither of them knew quite what to say next. It's such a lovely morning, said Flora at last. You know I can't help feeling happy in spite of everything. That's awful, I suppose. Quite natural, said Blunt. Never saw your uncle until 2 years ago, did you? Can't be expected to grieve very much. Much better to have no humbug about it. But there's something awfully consoling about you, said Flora. You make things so simple. But things are simple as a rule, said the big game hunter. Not always, said Flora. Her voice had lowered itself, and I saw Blunt turn and look at her, bringing his eyes back from apparently the coast of Africa to do so. He evidently put his own construction on her change of tone, for he said after a minute or two, in rather an abrupt manner, I say, you know, you mustn't worry. About that young chap, I mean. Inspector's an ass. Everybody knows, utterly absurd to think he could have done it. Man from outside. Burglar chap. That's the only possible solution. But Flora turned to look at him. You really think so? Don't you? Said Blunt quickly. Oh, yes, of course. But another silence, and then Flora burst out. I'll tell you why I felt so happy this morning. However heartless you think me, I'd rather tell you. It's because the lawyer has been, Mr. Hammond. He told us about the will. Uncle Roger has left me £20,000. Think of it, 20,000 beautiful pounds. But Blunt looked surprised. Does it mean so much to you? Mean much to me? Why, it's everything. Freedom, life, no more scheming and scraping and lying. Lying, said Blunt, sharply interrupting. Flora seemed taken aback for a minute. You know what I mean, she said uncertainly. Pretending to be thankful for all the nasty cast-off things rich relations give you. Last year's coats and skirts and hats. But don't know much about ladies' clothes. Should have said you were always very well turned out. But it's cost me something, though, said Flora in a low voice. Don't let's talk of horrid things. I'm so happy. I'm free. Free to do what I like. Free not to. She stopped suddenly. Not to what? Asked Blunt quickly. I forget now. Nothing important. But Blunt had a stick in his hand, and he thrust it into the pond, poking at something. What are you doing, Major Blunt? There's something bright down there. Wondered what it was. Looks like a gold brooch. Now I've stirred up the mud and it's gone. But perhaps it's a crown, suggested Flora. Like the one Melisande saw in the water. But Melisande, said Blunt reflectively. She's in an opera, isn't she? Yes, you seem to know a lot about operas. But people take me sometimes, said Blunt sadly. Funny idea of pleasure, worse racket than the natives make with their tom-toms. But Flora laughed. I remember Melisande, continued Blunt, married an old chap old enough to be her father. But he threw a small piece of flint into the goldfish pond. Then, with a change of manner, he turned to Flora. Miss Ackroyd, can I do anything? About Pattern, I mean. I know how dreadfully anxious you must be. But thank you, said Flora in a cold voice. There is really nothing to be done. Ralph will be all right. I've got hold of the most wonderful detective in the world, and he's going to find out all about it. But for some time I had felt uneasy as to our position. We were not exactly eavesdropping, since the two in the garden below had only to lift their heads to see us. Nevertheless, I should have drawn attention to our presence before now, had not my companion put a warning pressure on my arm. Clearly he wished me to remain silent, but now he rose briskly to his feet, clearing his throat. I demand pardon, he cried. I cannot allow Mademoiselle thus extravagantly to compliment me, and not draw attention to my presence. They say the listener hears no good of himself, but that is not the case this time. To spare my blushes, I must join you and apologize. But he hurried down the path with me close behind him, and joined the others by the pond. This is M. Hercule Poirot, said Flora. I expect you've heard of him. But Poirot bowed. I know Major Blunt by reputation, he said politely. I am glad to have encountered you, monsieur. I am in need of some information that you can give me. But Blunt looked at him inquiringly. When did you last see M? Ackroyd alive. At dinner. But, and you neither saw nor heard anything of him after that. Didn't see him. Heard his voice. But how was that? I strolled out on the terrace. Pardon me, what time was this? About 9:30. I was walking up and down smoking in front of the drawing-room window. I heard Ackroyd talking in his study. Poirot stooped and removed a microscopic weed. Surely you couldn't hear voices in the study from that part of the terrace, he murmured. He was not looking at Blunt, but I was, and to my intense surprise, I saw the latter flush. Went as far as the corner, he explained unwillingly. Ah, indeed, said Poirot. In the mildest manner, he conveyed an impression that more was wanted. Thought I saw a woman disappearing into the bushes. Just a gleam of white, you know. Must have been mistaken. It was while I was standing at the corner of the terrace that I heard Ackroyd's voice speaking to that secretary of his. But speaking to Mr. Geoffrey Raymond. Yes, that's what I supposed at the time. Seems I was wrong, but Mr. Ackroyd didn't address him by name. Oh, no. But then, if I may ask, why did you think? Blunt explained laboriously. Took it for granted that it would be Raymond, because he had said just before I came out that he was taking some papers to Ackroyd. Never thought of it being anybody else. But can you remember what the words you heard were? Afraid I can't. Something quite ordinary and unimportant. Only caught a scrap of it. I was thinking of something else at the time. But it is of no importance, murmured Poirot. Did you move a chair back against the wall when you went into the study after the body was discovered? Chair, no, why should I? Poirot shrugged his shoulders but did not answer. He turned to Flora. There is one thing I should like to know from you, mademoiselle. When you were examining the things in the silver table with Dr. Shepherd, was the dagger in its place, or was it not? Flora's chin shot up. Inspector Raglan has been asking me that, she said resentfully. I've told him and I'll tell you. I'm perfectly certain the dagger was not there. He thinks it was, and that Ralph sneaked it later in the evening. And he doesn't believe me. He thinks I'm saying it to shield Ralph. But, and aren't you? I asked gravely. Flora stamped her foot. You too, Doctor. Shepherd, oh, it's too bad. But Poirot tactfully made a diversion. It is true what I heard you say, Major Blunt. There is something that glitters in this pond. Let us see if I can reach it. But he knelt down by the pond, baring his arm to the elbow, and lowered it in very slowly, so as not to disturb the bottom of the pond. But in spite of all his precautions, the mud eddied and swirled, and he was forced to draw his arm out again empty-handed. He gazed ruefully at the mud upon his arm. I offered him my handkerchief, which he accepted with fervent protestations of thanks. Blunt looked at his watch. Nearly lunch-time, he said. We'd better be getting back to the house. But you will lunch with us, M. Poirot asked Flora. I should like you to meet my mother. She is very fond of Ralph. But the little man bowed. I shall be delighted, mademoiselle. But, and you will stay too, won't you, Doctor? Shepherd. I hesitated. Oh, do. I wanted to, so I accepted the invitation without further ceremony. We set out towards the house, Flora and Blunt walking ahead. What hair? Said Poirot to me in a low tone, nodding towards Flora. The real gold, they will make a pretty couple. She and the dark, handsome Captain Pattern. Will they not? I looked at him inquiringly, but he began to fuss about a few microscopic drops of water on his coat sleeve. The man reminded me in some ways of a cat. His green eyes and his finicking habits. And all for nothing too, I said sympathetically. I wonder what it was in the pond. Would you like to see? Asked Poirot. I stared at him. He nodded. My good friend, he said gently and reproachfully, Hercule Poirot does not run the risk of disarranging his costume without being sure of attaining his object. To do so would be ridiculous and absurd. I am never ridiculous. But you brought your hand out empty, I objected. There are times when it is necessary to have discretion. Do you tell your patients everything, Doctor? I think not. Nor do you tell your excellent sister everything either, is it not so? Before showing my empty hand, I dropped what it contained into my other hand. You shall see what that was. But he held out his left hand, palm open. On it lay a little circlet of gold. A woman's wedding ring. I took it from him. Look inside, commanded Poirot. I did so. Inside was an inscription in fine writing. From Ars, March 13th. I looked at Poirot, but he was busy inspecting his appearance in a tiny pocket glass. He paid particular attention to his moustaches, and none at all to me. I saw that he did not intend to be communicative. Chapter 10. The parlour maid. We found Mrs. Ackroyd in the hall. With her was a small, dried-up little man, with an aggressive chin and sharp grey eyes, and lawyer written all over him. Mr. Hammond is staying to lunch with us, said Mrs. Ackroyd. You know Major Blunt, Mr. Hammond, and dear Dr. Shepherd, also a close friend of poor Roger's. And let me see. She paused, surveying Hercule Poirot in some perplexity. This is M. Poirot, mother, said Flora. I told you about him this morning. But, oh yes, said Mrs. Ackroyd vaguely. Of course, my dear, of course. He is to find Ralph, is he not? He is to find out who killed Uncle, said Flora. Oh, my dear, cried her mother. Please, my poor nerves. I am a wreck this morning, a positive wreck. Such a dreadful thing to happen. I can't help feeling that it must have been an accident of some kind. Roger was so fond of handling queer curios. His hand must have slipped or something. But this theory was received in polite silence. I saw Poirot edge up to the lawyer and speak to him in a confidential undertone. They moved aside into the embrasure of the window. I joined them, then hesitated. Perhaps I'm intruding, I said. Not at all, cried Poirot heartily. You and I, Ems. Le Docteur, we investigate this affair side by side. Without you, I should be lost. I desire a little information from the good Mr. Hammond. But you are acting on behalf of Captain Ralph Pattern, I understand, said the lawyer cautiously. Poirot shook his head. Not so. I am acting in the interests of justice. Miss Ackroyd has asked me to investigate the death of her uncle. But Mr. Hammond seemed slightly taken aback. I cannot seriously believe that Captain Pattern can be concerned in this crime, he said, however strong the circumstantial evidence against him may be. The mere fact that he was hard-pressed for money. Was he hard-pressed for money? Interpolated Poirot quickly. The lawyer shrugged his shoulders. It was a chronic condition with Ralph Pattern, he said dryly. Money went through his hands like water. He was always applying to his stepfather. But had he done so of late, during the last year, for instance? I cannot say. Mr. Ackroyd did not mention the fact to me. But I comprehend. Mr. Hammond, I take it that you are acquainted with the provisions of Mr. Ackroyd's will. Certainly. That is my principal business here today. But then, seeing that I am acting for Miss Ackroyd, you will not object to telling me the terms of that will. They are quite simple, shorn of legal phraseology, and after paying certain legacies and bequests, such as the interrupted Poirot. Mr. Hammond seemed a little surprised. £1,000 to his housekeeper, Miss Russell, £50 to the cook, Emma Cooper, £500 to his secretary, Mr. Geoffrey Raymond. Then to various hospitals. Poirot held up his hand. Ah, the charitable bequests, they interest me not. But quite so. The income on £10,000, worth of shares to be paid to Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd during her lifetime. Miss Flora Ackroyd inherits £20,000 outright. The residue, including this property and the shares in Ackroyd and Son, to his adopted son Ralph Pattern. But Mr. Ackroyd possessed a large fortune. A very large fortune. Captain Pattern will be an exceedingly wealthy young man. But there was a silence. Poirot and the lawyer looked at each other. Mr. Hammond, came Mrs. Ackroyd's voice plaintively from the fireplace. The lawyer answered the summons. Poirot took my arm and drew me right into the window. Regard the irises, he remarked in rather a loud voice. Magnificent, are they not? A straight and pleasing effect. But at the same time I felt the pressure of his hand on my arm, and he added in a low tone, Do you really wish to aid me, to take part in this investigation?" "Yes, indeed," I said eagerly. "There's nothing I should like better. You don't know what a dull old fogey's life I lead. Never anything out of the ordinary. But good, we will be colleagues then. In a minute or two I fancy Major Blunt will join us. He is not happy with the good mamma. Now there are some things I want to know, but I do not wish to seem to want to know them. You comprehend, so it will be your part to ask the questions." "But what questions do you want me to ask?" I asked apprehensively. "I want you to introduce the name of Mrs. Ferrars." "But yes, speak of her in a natural fashion. Ask him if he was down here when her husband died. You understand the kind of thing I mean. And while he replies, watch his face without seeming to watch it. C'est compris." There was no time for more, for at that minute, as Poirot had prophesied, Blunt left the others in his abrupt fashion and came over to us. I suggested strolling on the terrace, and he acquiesced. Poirot stayed behind. I stopped to examine a late rose. How things change in the course of a day or so, I observed. I was up here last Wednesday, I remember, walking up and down this same terrace. Ackroyd was with me, full of spirits. And now, 3 days later, Ackroyd's dead, poor fellow, Mrs. Ferrars is dead. You knew her, didn't you? But of course you did. But Blunt nodded his head. Had you seen her since you'd been down this time? Went with Ackroyd to call. Last Tuesday, think it was. Fascinating woman, but something queer about her. Deep, one would never know what she was up to. But I looked into his steady grey eyes. Nothing there surely. I went on. I suppose you met her before. But last time I was here, she and her husband had just come here to live. He paused a minute and then added, rum thing, she had changed a lot between then and now. But how changed, I asked. Looked 10 years older. But were you down here when her husband died? I asked, trying to make the question sound as casual as possible. No. From all I heard it would be a good riddance. Uncharitable perhaps, but the truth. But I agreed. Ashley Ferrars was by no means a pattern husband, I said cautiously. Blackguard, I thought, said Blunt. No, I said, only a man with more money than was good for him. But, oh, money, all the troubles in the world can be put down to money, or the lack of it. But which has been your particular trouble? I asked. I've enough for what I want. I'm one of the lucky ones. But, indeed. But I'm not too flush just now, as a matter of fact. Came into a legacy a year ago, and like a fool let myself be persuaded into putting it into some wildcat scheme. But I sympathised and narrated my own similar trouble. Then the gong pealed out, and we all went in to lunch. Poirot drew me back a little. A's by end. He's all right, I said. I'm sure of it. But nothing disturbing. He had a legacy just a year ago, I said. But why not? Why shouldn't he? I'll swear the man is perfectly square and above board. But without doubt, said Poirot soothingly. Do not upset yourself. But he spoke as though to a fractious child. We all trooped into the dining room. It seemed incredible that less than 24 hours had passed since I last sat at that table. Afterwards, Mrs. Ackroyd took me aside and sat down with me on a sofa. I can't help feeling a little hurt, she murmured, producing a handkerchief of the kind obviously not meant to be cried into. Hurt, I mean, by Roger's lack of confidence in me. That £20,000 ought to have been left to me, not to Flora. A mother could be trusted to safeguard the interests of her child. A lack of trust, I call it. But you forget, Mrs. Ackroyd, I said. Flora was Ackroyd's own niece, a blood relation. It would have been different had you been his sister instead of his sister-in-law. But as poor Cecil's widow, I think my feelings ought to have been considered, said the lady, touching her eyelashes gingerly with the handkerchief. But Roger was always most peculiar, not to say mean, about money matters. It has been a most difficult position for both Flora and myself. He did not even give the poor child an allowance. He would pay her bills, you know, and even that with a good deal of reluctance, and asking what she wanted all those fal-lals for, so like a man. But now I've forgotten what it was I was going to say. Oh yes, not a penny we could call our own, you know. Flora resented it. Yes, I must say she resented it very strongly. Though devoted to her uncle, of course. But any girl would have resented it. Yes, I must say Roger had very strange ideas about money. He wouldn't even buy new face towels, though I told him the old ones were in holes. And then proceeded Mrs. Ackroyd with a sudden leap highly characteristic of her conversation, to leave all that money, £1,000, fancy £1,000, to that woman. But what woman? That Russell woman. Something very queer about her, and so I've always said. But Roger wouldn't hear a word against her. Said she was a woman of great force of character, and that he admired and respected her. He was always going on about her rectitude and independence and moral worth. I think there's something fishy about her. She was certainly doing her best to marry Roger, but I soon put a stop to that. She's always hated me. Naturally, I saw through her, but I began to wonder if there was any chance of stemming Mrs. Ackroyd's eloquence and getting away. Mr. Hammond provided the necessary diversion by coming up to say goodbye. I seized my chance and rose also. About the inquest, I said, where would you prefer it to be held? Here or at the Three Boars? Mrs. Ackroyd stared at me with a dropped jaw. The inquest, she asked, the picture of consternation. But surely there won't have to be an inquest. Mr. Hammond gave a dry little cough and murmured, inevitable. Under the circumstances, in 2 short little barks. But surely, Doctor, Shepherd can arrange. There are limits to my powers of arrangement, I said dryly. If his death was an accident. He was murdered, Mrs. Ackroyd, I said brutally. She gave a little cry. No theory of accident will hold water for a minute. But Mrs. Ackroyd looked at me in distress. I had no patience with what I thought was her silly fear of unpleasantness. If there's an inquest, I shan't have to answer questions and all that, shall I? She asked. I don't know what will be necessary, I answered. I imagine Mr. Raymond will take the brunt of it off you. He knows all the circumstances and can give formal evidence of identification. But the lawyer assented with a little bow. I really don't think there is anything to dread, Mrs. Ackroyd, he said. You will be spared all unpleasantness. Now, as to the question of money, have you all you need for the present? I mean, he added as she looked at him inquiringly, ready money. Cash, you know. If not, I can arrange to let you have whatever you require. But that ought to be all right, said Raymond, who was standing by. Mr. Ackroyd cashed a cheque for £100 yesterday. But £100? Yes, for wages and other expenses due today. At the moment it is still intact. But where is this money? In his desk? No, he always kept his cash in his bedroom. In an old collar box, to be accurate. Funny idea, wasn't it? I think, said the lawyer, we ought to make sure the money is there before I leave. Certainly, agreed the secretary. I'll take you up now. Oh, I forgot. The door's locked. Inquiry from Parker elicited the information that Inspector Raglan was in the housekeeper's room, asking a few supplementary questions. A few minutes later, the inspector joined the party in the hall, bringing the key with him. He unlocked the door, and we passed into the lobby and up the small staircase. At the top of the stairs, the door into Ackroyd's bedroom stood open. Inside the room it was dark, the curtains were drawn, and the bed was turned down just as it had been last night. The inspector drew the curtains, letting in the sunlight, and Geoffrey Raymond went to the top drawer of a rosewood bureau. He kept his money like that in an unlocked drawer. Just fancy, commented the inspector. The secretary flushed a little. Mr. Ackroyd had perfect faith in the honesty of all the servants. He said hotly. Oh, quite so, said the inspector hastily. Raymond opened the drawer, took out a round leather collar box from the back of it, and opening it drew out a thick wallet. Here is the money, he said, taking out a fat roll of notes. You will find the 100 intact, I know, for Mr. Ackroyd put it in the collar box in my presence last night when he was dressing for dinner, and of course it has not been touched since. But Mr. Hammond took the roll from him and counted it. He looked up sharply. £100, you said, but there is only 60 here. Raymond stared at him. Impossible, he cried, springing forward. Taking the notes from the other's hand, he counted them aloud. Mr. Hammond had been right. The total amounted to £60. But I can't understand it, cried the secretary, bewildered. Poirot asked a question. You saw Mr. Ackroyd put this money away last night when he was dressing for dinner. You are sure he had not paid away any of it already? I'm sure he hadn't. He even said, I don't want to take £100 down to dinner with me. Too bulgy. Then the affair is very simple, remarked Poirot. Either he paid out that £40 sometime last evening, or else it has been stolen. That's the matter in a nutshell, agreed the inspector. He turned to Mrs. Ackroyd. Which of the servants would come in here yesterday evening? I suppose the housemaid would turn down the bed. Who is she? What do you know about her? She's not been here very long, said Mrs. Ackroyd. But she's a nice, ordinary country girl. I think we ought to clear this matter up, said the inspector. If Mr. Ackroyd paid that money away himself, it may have a bearing on the mystery of the crime. The other servants all right as far as you know? Oh, I think so. Not missed anything before? No. None of them leaving or anything like that? The parlour maid is leaving. When? She gave notice yesterday, I believe. To you? Oh, no. I have nothing to do with the servants. Miss Russell attends to the household matters. The inspector remained lost in thought for a minute or two. Then he nodded his head and remarked, I think I'd better have a word with Miss Russell, and I'll see the girl Dale as well. Poirot and I accompanied him to the housekeeper's room. Miss Russell received us with her usual sang-froid. Elsie Dale had been at Fernley 5 months. A nice girl, quick at her duties, and most respectable. Good references. The last girl in the world to take anything not belonging to her. What about the parlour maid? She too was a most superior girl. Very quiet and ladylike. An excellent worker. Then why is she leaving? Asked the inspector. Miss Russell pursed up her lips. It was none of my doing. I understand Mr. Ackroyd found fault with her yesterday afternoon. It was her duty to do the study, and she disarranged some of the papers on his desk, I believe. He was very annoyed about it, and she gave notice. At least that is what I understood from her, but perhaps you'd like to see her yourselves. The inspector assented. I had already noticed the girl when she was waiting on us at lunch. A tall girl with a lot of brown hair rolled tightly away at the back of her neck, and very steady grey eyes. She came in answer to the housekeeper's summons, and stood very straight with those same grey eyes fixed on us. "You are Ursula Bourne?" asked the inspector. "Yes, sir." "But I understand you are leaving." "Yes, sir." "But why is that?" "I disarranged some papers on Mr. Ackroyd's desk. He was very angry about it, and I said I had better leave. He told me to go as soon as possible." "But were you in Mr. Ackroyd's bedroom at all last night, tidying up or anything?" "No, sir. That is Elsie's work. I never went near that part of the house. But I must tell you, my girl, that a large sum of money is missing from Mr. Ackroyd's room." But at last I saw her roused. A wave of colour swept over her face. "I know nothing about any money. If you think I took it, and that is why Mr. Ackroyd dismissed me, you are wrong." "But I'm not accusing you of taking it, my girl," said the inspector. "Don't flare up so." But the girl looked at him coldly. "You can search my things if you like," she said disdainfully. "But you won't find anything." But Poirot suddenly interposed. "It was yesterday afternoon that Mr. Ackroyd dismissed you, or you dismissed yourself, was it not?" he asked. The girl nodded. "How long did the interview last?" "The interview?" "Yes, the interview between you and Mr. Ackroyd in the study." I don't know. But 20 minutes, half an hour. Something like that. But not longer. Not longer than half an hour, certainly. But thank you, mademoiselle." But I looked curiously at him. He was rearranging a few objects on the table, setting them straight with precise fingers. His eyes were shining. "That'll do," said the inspector. Ursula Bourne disappeared. The inspector turned to Miss Russell. "How long has she been here? Have you got a copy of the reference you had with her?" Without answering the first question, Miss Russell moved to an adjacent bureau, opened one of the drawers, and took out a handful of letters clipped together with a patent fastener. She selected one and handed it to the inspector. "H.M.," said he. "Reads all right. Mrs. Richard Folliot, Marby Grange, Marby." "Who's this woman?" "Quite good county people," said Miss Russell. "Well," said the inspector, handing it back, "let's have a look at the other one, Elsie Dale." But Elsie Dale was a big fair girl, with a pleasant but slightly stupid face. She answered our questions readily enough, and showed much distress and concern at the loss of the money. "I don't think there's anything wrong with her," observed the inspector, after he had dismissed her. "What about Parker?" Miss Russell pursed her lips together and made no reply. "I've a feeling there's something wrong about that man," the inspector continued thoughtfully. "The trouble is that I don't quite see when he got his opportunity. He'd be busy with his duties immediately after dinner, and he's got a pretty good alibi all through the evening. I know, for I've been devoting particular attention to it." "Well, thank you very much, Miss Russell. We'll leave things as they are for the present. It's highly probable Mr. Ackroyd paid that money away himself." But The housekeeper bade us a dry good afternoon, and we took our leave. I left the house with Poirot. I wonder, I said, breaking the silence, what the papers the girl disarranged could have been for Ackroyd to have got into such a state about them. I wonder if there is any clue there to the mystery. But the secretary said there were no papers of particular importance on the desk, said Poirot quietly. Yes, but I paused. It strikes you as odd that Ackroyd should have flown into a rage about so trivial a matter. Yes, it does rather. But was it a trivial matter? Of course, I admitted, we don't know what those papers may have been. But Raymond certainly said, "Leave M. Raymond out of it for a minute. What did you think of that girl?" Which girl? The parlour maid? Yes, the parlour maid. Ursula Bourne. But she seemed a nice girl, I said hesitatingly. Poirot repeated my words, but whereas I had laid a slight stress on the fourth word, he put it on the second. She seemed a nice girl, yes. But then, after a minute's silence, he took something from his pocket and handed it to me. See, my friend, I will show you something. Look there. But the paper he had handed me was that compiled by the inspector and given by him to Poirot that morning. Following the pointing finger, I saw a small cross marked in pencil opposite the name Ursula. You may not have noticed it at the time, my good friend, but there was one person on this list whose alibi had no kind of confirmation. Ursula Bourne. But you don't think... Doctor... Shepherd, I dare to think anything. Ursula Bourne may have killed Mr. Ackroyd, but I confess I can see no motive for her doing so. Can you? He looked at me very hard, so hard that I felt uncomfortable. Can you? He repeated. No motive whatsoever, I said firmly. His gaze relaxed. He frowned and murmured to himself. Since the blackmailer was a man, it follows that she cannot be the blackmailer then. I coughed. As far as that goes, I began doubtfully. He spun round on me. What are you going to say? Nothing. Nothing. Only that, strictly speaking, Mrs. Ferrars in her letter mentioned a person. She didn't actually specify a man. But we took it for granted, Ackroyd and I, that it was a man. But Poirot did not seem to be listening to me. He was muttering to himself again. But then it is possible after all, yes, certainly it is possible. But then, I must rearrange my ideas. Method, order, never have I needed them more. Everything must fit in its appointed place, otherwise I am on the wrong tack. But he broke off and whirled round upon me again. Where is Marby? It's on the other side of Cranchester. But how far away? Oh, 14 miles, perhaps. But would it be possible for you to go there, tomorrow, say? Tomorrow, let me see, that's Sunday. Yes, I could arrange it. What do you want me to do there? See this Mrs. Folliot. Find out all you can about Ursula Bourne. But very well. But I don't much care for the job. But it is not the time to make difficulties. A man's life may hang on this. But poor Ralph, I said with a sigh. You believe him to be innocent, though. Poirot looked at me very gravely. Do you want to know the truth? Of course. But then you shall have it. My friend, everything points to the assumption that he is guilty. But what? I exclaimed. Poirot nodded. Yes, that stupid inspector, for he is stupid, has everything pointing his way. I seek for the truth, and the truth leads me every time to Ralph Patten. Motive, opportunity, means. But I will leave no stone unturned. I promised Mademoiselle Flora, and she was very sure, that little one, but very sure indeed.